We are live, week 11. To all my friends, welcome, Chris Allen, Dr. Jene Bramel, and let's dispose with the pleasantries and get right to the not pleasantries. Gene, let's start with Kyler Murray. It feels like it's a bit of a tease here, and I don't think we're going to get Murray back until after the bye.
No, I don't think so. It looks like he's nearing, I wouldn't say full recovery, but he's getting close enough to play. This is interesting, though, because Colt McCoy, even though he fully practiced on Friday, dealing with a pectoral strain, that's not necessarily an easy thing for a quarterback to play through. So I think that's as informative to what Murray is dealing with as anything else. They're going to let him get right through the bye. I think they feel like, without Hopkins, without Murray, they still have a chance in Seattle. Probably going to see a run heavy situation again. There, even with Edmonds down with James Conner today, but doesn't look like he's going to play. I suppose they're still giving him a chance in pregame warmups, but it sounds like that decision was made early in the week again.
Gene, do we need to send Lamar Jackson, I don't know, some kids Tylenol or something? Do we need to send him
zinc lozenges?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. What is going on with Lamar Jackson, and can we expect to see him today?
Yeah, I'm not an adult doctor, but what we've been seeing in kids and teenagers is a particularly nasty form of just plain old runny nose virus going on out there, where you're seeing more fevers and more coughs than you'd ordinarily expect. And the Ravens promoted another quarterback to the active roster as a hedge for Jackson. I think he's still likely to play. In previous years before 2020, this would not be an issue. Fever, no fever, cough, no cough. We probably wouldn't even be hearing about illnesses that much. But being where we are now, thankfully, it's not a COVID situation. The Ravens just aren't going to know until this morning. So Jackson's going to have to pass another COVID test if he's still symptomatic. I don't think they'll clear him to play if he has a fever, for example. So just not going to know the situation. And I'm a little bit surprised we haven't had a little bit of information already from a national reporter. The Ravens know right now whether or not Jackson is going to be able to go. It's not a pregame warm-up situation. It is are you too symptomatic to play or are you not? And Jackson's already up and in the team facilities on the road there. So it's probably a good thing that we haven't heard anything yet. So I'm tentatively expecting him to be active, and I don't think it's likely something that's going to limit him that much. If he's active, it's mostly just precautionary that they're listing him questionable. So cross your fingers that I'm leaning in the direction that is actually going to happen.
All right, Gene, another one where we've been in a holding pattern for a while, and we have to wait until Monday night to know about Saquon Barkley. It was week 5. Didn't they reassure us it was only going to be a few weeks? And I know that he might have been back in week 9. And is that the key to knowing whether you should go ahead and trust him, start him tomorrow night?
I think you can trust him. I think there's a good chance he would have played in week 9 had so many of the Giants not been put into COVID protocol for that, what was probably false positive results. He just wasn't able to prove to the team because he wasn't there for those midweek important practices for evaluation that he was going to be able to go. So beat writers have said he looks good. The limited practice video we've seen says he looks good. The Giants didn't really add anybody to the roster this week. Devontae Booker's still dealing with a hip issue too. So I think both of those guys are going to be active. I think there's a chance we could see Barkley get 15 carries right away. And yes, it was a low ankle sprain, but it was always a pretty violent mechanism. So it was going to be a 2 to 3 week situation. I think the COVID situation probably kept him from playing in week 9, and he should be good to go this week.
So, Gene, I know that we're going into this game with the 49ers and Jacksonville with Elijah Mitchell most likely doubtful, probably not playing. But can we expect to see him next week? Is this more of a pain tolerance thing with the fractured finger?
Yeah, I don't know. I think this was a situation where the Niners knew they could play games with the media a little bit. They knew as soon as this procedure was necessary that he wasn't going to play this week. Doubtful just to complete the gamesmanship, but nobody plays when they're listed as doubtful. So this is the same thing as them declaring him out. And you're asking the right question. What does it mean for next week? That's hard to know because we don't know precisely. All we heard was that it was his third finger, and it was apparently not obvious enough where he felt like he needed to come out or somebody noticed what was going on in last week's game. So I think there's a chance he could play, but you're right, with a dominant hand, assuming he's right-handed, running back situation to limit ball security, to limit pass blocking, to limit pass catching. This could easily be a week-to-week situation. They didn't put him on injured reserve yesterday, which is good, but I'd still consider him questionable for next week too.
Gene, there's a wide chasm between Rob Gronkowski found his old game. Yeah, he took a really hard hit. Yeah, he had back spasms, but still with Brady, they're still slinging it. It's going to be fine. And no, Rob Gronkowski's got enough back to give us a shooting star, Gene, a moment when we remembered him, and he is breaking down. Where are we on that scale?
I'm confused again. So when we talked about this last week, I was thinking, okay, this is not back spasms. It's probably related to the back issues that he's had in the past and the multiple surgeries he's had to address some disc conditions. When he talked to the media this week, he sort of suggested that, well, maybe we did do things a little bit too soon. That's what he was implying. He wasn't implying that this was a new issue. And for him to bounce back as quickly as he did from those quote unquote back spasms makes you think that maybe it was a conditioning issue because he had missed so much time with the rib and lung injuries. Maybe there was a little bit of a connection as he was working to come back, that he had some back issues there. So that's sort of where we thought we were, and everything looked to be all systems go for him on Monday night until the DNP on Friday. So or Saturdays. It's hard to know exactly where we are with Gronkowski. Tom Brady did talk to the media yesterday morning and sounded like Gronkowski's going to play. We're excited to have him back. And they didn't list him as doubtful, which they've been doing when he's not been able to play in the past. So I'm expecting him to go. I don't think he's going to be in condition to see 40, 50 snaps necessarily. You're probably going to see, somewhere between 20 and 30, 3 to 5 targets at the most, but they're going to be high leverage situations. And that the Buccaneers have been struggling in the red zone a little bit, and that's where Gronkowski's probably going to be most effective for them. So I think what I wrote this morning is that I think you ought to have a hedge in place just in case there is something more going on Saturday into Sunday than we're aware of. There were no reports overnight from Schefter or Rappaport, which tells you that they're probably still evaluating things through the weekend. It would have been great if Schefter included Gronkowski in his players expected to play tweet overnight on Saturday night, but that's not been the case. So I think I'd have a hedge in place if you can. Otherwise, I'm leaning still toward him being probable based on Brady's comments yesterday.
Dr. Gene, did you see anything in the game last week for the Ravens where Marquis Brown actually got hurt? Because I don't remember hearing anything reported during the game. I thought him missing practice early in the week was more of a maintenance thing than anything else, and now he's out.
Yeah.
Is this more of a prolonged thing, or should we expect to see him back in week 12?
Could be. So two things I didn't like this week is that, the Friday limited practice suggested that turned into be more of an evaluation situation than anything else. And then for him to be ruled out so quickly the following day suggests that we're probably more in a week-to-week situation than a day-to-day situation. Also, Jeff Zerbiak, one of the beat writers there, pretty much told us that this is a hamstring deal. You never know for sure with thigh. Could it be a hip issue? Is there a little bit of contusion? Is that not necessarily a long-term deal? But Zerbiak said these are usually a hamstring, and there's no reason for him to say that unless he knows that it's a hamstring. And then alluded further by that it was potentially a week-to-week situation by saying these are things that have limited Brown before in the past. So the Ravens have been pretty careful about their veterans and not practicing them. So for sure, Friday, okay, did a limited practice, questionable. That's kind of what we expected, has a chance to play. But all of those other factors have me wondering whether or not week 12 is going to be possible for him too. So questionable at best next week.
Gene, we got complications because it's Thanksgiving. Hope everyone is with people that they care about them. And a lot of people from Buffalo are going to be down here in New Orleans. Is Alvin Kamara going to be on the field when they watch them play?
Yep, we'll see about that one too. That's another. There's so many Friday practices this week that were evaluation situations. Kamara and Donovan Peoples-Jones and Marquis Brown, and to some extent, Kyler Murray's limited practices were those as well. And I think we're going to be worried about Kamara. So what we don't know, these injuries are not enough for those guys to have gone on injured reserve, and I'm including Aaron Jones in this as well. But we don't know, is the knee still feeling stiff? We just don't feel like there's enough range of motion to be able to cut and do everything that a running back should do. Or is there some leftover looseness in the joint? And no, it wasn't a high-grade injury, but that still takes some time to heal. And with all of the lateral movement that a running back does, that MCL, the ligament on the inside of the knee, is really important. So for him to be evaluated on Wednesday and then essentially ruled out right afterwards tells you that he wasn't particularly close to playing this week. So regardless of the fact that we're dealing with, players not going on injured reserve and you expect that to be a 1 to 2 week situation, that's the implication. That's not been the case multiple times this year. We talked about this on Thursday nights in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So Thursday's a quick turnaround. What we're going to see is a Tuesday evaluation practice, maybe even the Monday, and then we'll know based on what Monday, Tuesday practice looks like whether or not he's going to be able to go. I don't foresee this as being a DNP limited and play. I think there's a chance that he's able to go, but will need to have been a fair amount of interval improvement over these last 4 or 5 days since Wednesday's practice for that to be able to happen.
I know we talked about Kyler already. DeAndre Hopkins not playing this week. Can we expect to see him back next week with his injury that he's been out for the past 2-3 games now?
Yeah, I think so. So my general expectation is an aggravated hamstring injury is going to take at least as long, if not an extra grade longer, to recover from than the initial injury. So probably pushed it too much to play in that Thursday game back in week 8, I think it was. So that was probably a 1 to 2 week situation that's become 2 to 4. There was enough information from Bruce Arians and John Keim this week that makes me think that that their target is he's close enough that they expect him back in a couple of weeks. But again, we're going to want to see that he's got some reconditioning and some practice time behind him to feel comfortable with him being able to be his usual self. But yeah, it looks like week 13 is going to be the target for him.
Okay, I'm going to go big picture here, Gene, even though it's Sunday morning and we're talking micro, because as we're asking all these questions, I want to just serve up a couple big picture propositions to you and see what you think. Okay, because what I'm struck by is we have these conversations every week because you're so gracious and so thoughtful and thorough with your evaluations, is that we're in a bit of a unexplored frontier with the NFL and injuries, because the 3-week IR has been a tactical use now. Not, last year it was to accommodate a changing landscape. Now teams know they have it at their disposal, right? And then also we have an 18-week season, a 17-game season. So I want to toss up 2 propositions for you, and it has to do with DeAndre Hopkins and Kyler Murray. Are at least some teams, do you think, reacting to the 18-game schedule with the NBA load management style approach to injury recovery? And really, everyone's the Green Bay Packers, right? Everyone's being really conservative, or at least teams are more inclined to do that, and we can factor that into our projections. But this is the other side of this, because we keep talking about these IR players. And based on what's been happening, Gene, I'm totally unscientific here. The fact that players aren't going on injured reserve doesn't mean they're going to be back in 3 weeks. It often, and when players do go on injured reserve and they're designated to return, they often aren't returning right away. Sometimes there's David Montgomery's, but there's a lot more players that stay in a holding pattern. And what I wonder, Doc, is given the task of predicting how long a player will be out with an injury, with just the team making the call, that they're not very accurate, that they're really underestimating these lengths. So load management and what we're learning about NFL.
I think load management is a possibility with the longer, and but the difficulty with that for me is that yes, there's an extra game, but there's only 17 games in the regular season, and one game often towards the end of the year means the difference between a playoff spot, a playoff bye, division championship, that sort of stuff. And I think the players that are not coming back when they're close, teams are recognizing that taking a risk, and we've seen what happens with DeAndre Hopkins. We've seen what has happened with many other players. Man, there's probably too many to list, where they come back a little bit too soon, and a 1 to 2 week situation becomes a 4 to 6 week situation, and those 4 games are as important as the one game that you're trying to get the player through. So I've been preaching most of the year that this short-term IR is a data point only. Because a player does not go on short-term IR does not mean that they're going to be back in 2 weeks. Because a player does go on short-term IR, teams don't have to give as precise, or we're not hearing as precise reporting sometimes on, we hear from sometimes 4 to 10 weeks, I
Right.
think. And Ryan
Carson
Fitzpatrick
Wentz.
was pretty much, and
Mhm.
Chris Carson, all this. So we just don't know exactly where it is. So use it as a data point, but we're still sort of judging the injury and the practice participation to see where we are, because many of these injuries are probably in the 2 to 4 week time frame, and they could just as easily be 4, or if things don't go as well at week 3 and their rehab, it could be a 4 to 6 week situation. And even though we expect, Rob Gronkowski being among them, Hopkins now being among them, some players, maybe it did make sense for them to use a roster spot on somebody else, but we don't know that as well, right? I mean, Robert Woods is still not on injured reserve officially. So if a team doesn't necessarily have to use that roster spot on somebody, they're not really making that choice, then that's, we're sort of where we are there. So I think load management maybe a little bit. I think teams are being a little bit more cautious and conservative in saying that we're not going to push players to recover if we feel like there's a risk that we may lose them for an extra couple of weeks afterwards. But that is not in the same way I used to say, don't pay much attention to the green dot on your IDP players, because the green dot can change. The helmets can change a little bit. That doesn't necessarily tell you what the team thinks of that particular player. I'm not paying as much attention to that IR, right? So if a player doesn't go on IR, that tells you that, 2 to 3 weeks is possible, but it doesn't mean that 3 to 4 weeks is not going to be the outcome. And with the bye weeks in between time, these things stretch out a little bit longer. So I don't know if that was a helpful answer or
No,
not,
it
but
is.
I'm not putting a ton of stock into that IR other than it guides. So for me, what I'm thinking of initially is, can a player return the same week safely and effectively? And then if not, is it 1 to 2? Is it 2 to 4? Is it 3 to 6? Is it 4 to 8? And I'm making those judgments based on what the injury looked like, how severe it was, what we're hearing about the imaging studies, and what the national beat writers are getting from players, coaches, agents, and that initial tone there. And all that has to fit together. So Alvin Kamara, it was probably never going to be a 1 week injury. Okay. So it's a 2 to 4 week situation. And that's why I'm saying I think he's still questionable for Thursday, even though he wasn't put on short term IR. And the same
Right.
thing goes for Aaron Jones. So it was great to hear he wasn't on injured reserve, but that doesn't mean he's playing in week 14, even after the bye. I think that's a reasonable goal, but it's an extra data point that we can use. It complicates things for deciding what we're going to do with roster spots and what have you. But it's not, we can't be using that as the primary factor. The injury is the primary factor. The team's decision making is secondary.
So I guess with that in mind, we've got like 2 running backs coming off of IR. We got Clyde Edwards-Helaire returning today, and then also Miles Sanders returning for the Eagles, both coming off IR. I don't know if the mechanisms are similar, both knee injuries though. I mean, with the amount of time that they've been away, I mean, should we at least temper our expectations with them coming off of IR and seeing what their workload is going to be from their respective teams?
Yeah, I think it's good that both of them were cleared to play. Miles Sanders was really reportedly looking pretty good in practice. We just weren't really sure whether or not they were clearing to come back or not. Nick Sirianni has said that Sanders is the starter, but Jordan Howard's been playing well. Boston Scott has been playing well. I don't think that we're going to immediately see Miles Sanders get, 12 to 15 plus touches today. I suppose there's some upside in that regard, but I think they're going to recondition him a little bit. This might be a week where you actually see all 3 players. That's not really been happening with Philadelphia recently. They've had 1 player in the initial role and 1 player in kind of the change of pace role, whatever that may be for them. So they've been kind of a 2 running back team, but this may be a week where, you think that Miles Sanders and Jordan Howard were kind of in the same overlapping role. I think I'm accurate in saying that. And I just don't see Jordan Howard getting 0 to 2 touches today, even though he's been dealing with a little bit of something of his own. So I don't think you're going to get a ton of work from Sanders. Edwards-Helaire is interesting because Darrell Williams has been playing well enough that you could have easily seen the team, and Andy Reid has kind of been hinting at this over the last couple of weeks. Well, let's go ahead and give Clyde Edwards-Helaire as much time as he needs to recover. We got a bye next week. We're going to use it. Williams has been fine. Our team is playing well. We don't necessarily need a player to come in for those 8 to 10 touches. So it looks, to me, my read of that situation is, let's work on Edwards-Helaire's conditioning now. And if we have any issue with Darrell Williams during the game, we know that he's ready to go and support us because this is the game we'd like to win. And we might need, this could easily be a 70 offensive snap game against Dallas. And maybe 15 to 25 snaps for Edwards-Helaire makes some sense. But I don't think we're going to see him get a ton of snaps either. So both of those guys get worked in this week, I feel like, hopefully prove that they're in condition and pass the window of aggravation. And then they get fully assimilated back into the offense from there.
Yes, Gene, that was a good answer. Well, I just think it's great because you're there, but prognosticating this is part of what we're doing. We're factoring into player values, and I think you've guided us for a long time for the idea that there is a return to play conditioning when it's a multi-week injury, and we tend to overestimate the return to play date. And that is something you can exploit in fantasy football. Speaking of another player that falls into this, and this is one, I like how the theme this week, Gene, has been confused. And that's when we've spent, usually we're letting you go at 10 or 15 minute mark, and we're almost at 20 minutes and we're still going because there are a lot of situations where we're getting mixed signals. Here's another one. Kyle Shanahan, Elijah Mitchell's got a good chance to play. And of course, we're going to rely on that. And now it feels like, a disappointment or a letdown that he's not playing or doubtful. And we're factoring into this. What is Jeff Wilson's value? How long can it persist? So if Kyle Shanahan had never said that, Gene, What would we be thinking? How much does it match up with reality?
I didn't really match up with reality at all. I think, as we were talking about earlier, as soon as he was having that procedure, the chances of him playing this week were essentially zero. Right. So tough player, already played through it. So, the confusing things there were he played through the injury and had, what do you have, over 30 touches last week or something like that? I think
Right.
27 rushes and 3 or 4 catches. And then for Shanahan to say, we're going to see how he does. But, if we're not practicing on Wednesday or Thursday during that evaluation period, knowing that the Niners are more than comfortable going with multiple running backs and Jeff Wilson is coming back healthy, that there just wasn't much chance. So I think next week is the more concerning thing for Mitchell as well. But yeah, there's so many players in this situation right now. And again, there are some coaches that we can read well enough to know when they're just blowing smoke and when we're actually got a chance to play. But we're mostly judging the injury rather than the swirling whatever. Cordero Patterson on Thursday, for him to be limited in practice all week and for him to be called a game time decision, that wasn't happening. So again, just you have to pay attention to what's going on with the injury and
Right.
reading around what you're being told from the coaches and use the practice participation reports there. But that was the same way with Mitchell. He's listed doubtful, but he's not playing.
Last one for you, Dr. Gene. Antonio Brown, like how much longer can we expect to see him out?
See, that's a tough one too. So it seems like he's closer to playing than what he looks, which is odd. So when you watch the rehab video and when you watch him moving around in practice, he looks like he is not close to being able to return at all. But his tone, the tone of some folks around the team, seem to suggest that he's closer than it sounds. So this is going to be another situation where I'm going to stay pessimistic on him until Bruce Arians pretty clearly says he feels good enough to go, and we see some evidence of that in the practice participation line. So there seems to be indications that he's going to be able to come back next week. I'm skeptical. Hopefully that's the case. They get Gronk back this week. They get Antonio Brown back the following week, and they are, everything that you had in the first 4 to 6 weeks of the season is cruising come playoff push and playoff time for fantasy leagues. That would be great. But if you're holding on to Antonio Brown or Evans, Godwin, Tom Brady, you want Antonio Brown as healthy as possible. You don't want this to be a situation where he aggravates the injury and then you don't know what you got in weeks 14, 15, 16 and beyond.
Thankfully, we have your skepticism, your healthy skepticism, Gene, to rely on.
I'm saying I don't know. So
no, well, exactly. I don't want to make you blush, Gene, but I'm always struck by your integrity in your answer. And no matter what, I know that it has your thought behind it. And you're like, well, if you're going to ask me, I'm really going to give you the best answer I can give you. And sometimes that is we don't know, and we can all not know together with Dr. Gene week in, week out, helping us make these decisions. Doc, it's great to spend Thursdays and Sundays and kinda Tuesday mornings with you.
Yeah, absolutely. At least in picture form, anyhow. Those are always very good. You guys have a great Thanksgiving. Everybody stay healthy, travel safe. We'll talk next week. See you.
All right. We got a lot to go through. And I know we spend a lot of time on injuries, but injuries are a big part of that picture because the shifting player values. I really am struck by it though, Chris, the way that it feels like almost all, 80%, 70% of these injury situations are coming in later than initial. We're too optimistic, and there's something there. Speaking of optimism, let's go through. I can tell there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of themes. So more than individual data points of saying thumbs up, thumbs down on comparing these players to individual players, I just want to touch on our general temperature check. Okay. I'm going to try to get through as many of these as I can for people. Okay. Number one is Jeff Wilson. So where are we at? Cold, cool, lukewarm, warm, hot? Where are we at with Jeff Wilson today?
Warm. Yeah, warm to hot. If you got him, fire him up. Because we just saw on this past week, how much they were going to rely on the run. So yeah, if you got him, I'm playing him wherever I have him.
And for folks that aren't familiar, if you haven't had the joy of Jeff Wilson on your roster in the past, when he's the lead back, when he doesn't have to share with anybody, and Trey Sermon is not really that much of a threat. We know that. He's had weak winner kind of weeks, 2-3 touchdowns.
Deebo Samuel is more of a threat than anybody else. Yeah. I mean, that's it.
Okay, Dante Foreman against Houston.
I like it. I mean, I would say between like on the, I guess we were doing like warm, lukewarm. I think more
Sure.
lukewarm than warm.
Right.
I think behind Jeff Wilson, just because Adrian Peterson's still there. Whatever
Right.
narrative you want to attach to that whole situation, whether it's Donta Foreman revenge, if you want to look at it like that. But Adrian Peterson coming home, because isn't he from like about that area? Or
Yeah,
something
Palestine,
like
Texas. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, however you want to look at it, but still, I mean, there should be enough workload between both backs that I think either could be viable today.
Absolutely. Well, here's what I foresee. It's the Texans. And I know we get caught on these trap games, but I could see both Peterson. I could see Peterson at like 15-60 in a touchdown and Foreman like maybe 14-90. He gets that Derrick Henry knockout blow late and maybe gets that touchdown too. There's enough room for both of them to hit as like running back 2 flex types.
Yes.
So another data point. I'm going to go through these running backs together first. With Alvin Kamara out, Mark Ingram at Philadelphia.
I'm not, I would say even behind both of those. I mean, while he was used as both a runner and a pass catcher, they've got 2 starting offensive linemen out today. And that being one of the larger strengths of their team, I would say he's a little bit behind either of those guys. Like while the opportunity will definitely be there, I just can't foresee the same level of productivity unless you're in a PPR league. But other than that, I'd probably have him behind both of those guys, or maybe right next to Donta Foreman.
Right. Foreman, Ingram becomes more of a coin flip in point per reception leagues in 0.5 in point like non-PPR leagues. You're like Foreman a little bit better.
Yeah.
What do we think about James Conner today with Colt McCoy against Seattle? So it's like we got glass half full, glass half empty.
No, I think, again, it's more about the projected opportunity, because if we're talking about like with Colt McCoy, he was fine when he first came in and he was stuck being the starter, like when Chase Edmonds went down. And against Seattle, with that team like currently like reeling after their shutout against Green Bay, I mean, I could totally see like James Conner having similar productivity, or take that back, similar opportunity than the guys that we were just talking about. And playing against that Seattle defense, the productivity, I think, could be there enough such that he winds up being even more productive than any of the guys that we've talked about so far. I mean, other than possibly like Jeff Wilson.
Yeah, Wilson, I think, stands out. And because, like you said, the commitment to the run, I wish that Wilson had more than just knocked the rust off last week and was really fully up to speed, but he's going to get a chance to do that this week against Jacksonville. And Connor's tough, because you have 2 pictures of Arizona the last 2 weeks. You have them going into San Francisco and Connor playing one of the best games of his career and Colt McCoy being locked in. And then last week, Cam Newton comes to the desert. You see the clip, by the way, Cam Newton and Robbie Anderson. Did you see that one?
Oh, yeah.
Moses, the desert.
Yeah.
That's one. It was fantastic. So great that Cam Newton's back. What a year from the reality show standpoint of the characters of the NFL.
Kudos to the NFL writers for
exactly.
What they've done
Oh yeah. It's beautiful. It's one of my favorite seasons to date. And you just don't know which Arizona you're going to get. Like an impotent Arizona that's really just looking to the bye, and the real team is going to come out of the bye, or are they going to show up? It's a divisional game, so that may help things. Okay, let's turn the page to wide receivers, because we have a couple of situations that came up late this week that put young wide receivers, or wide receivers that had lesser opportunity, into the spotlight. Same kind of temperature check on Rashad Bateman.
Rashad Bateman, I would say warmish. I mean, obviously this hinges on Lamar Jackson.
Right. It's like, what temperature is the Lamar Jackson water? Is it going to get it boiling, or is it just going to be tepid? Right.
Yeah, exactly. But either way, with I remember actually listening and watching the notes from Matt Harmon on Rashad Bateman when he was coming out, and seeing how most of the translation to Bateman's collegiate talent, like his route running capability and all that, and almost how it instantly clicked with Lamar as soon as he came off of IR. Chicago's defense, I think they're missing 3 of their starters today, if I'm remembering correctly. I think if Lamar plays, Rashad becomes at least somewhere like the warm to lukewarm range.
Yeah. I mean, you don't necessarily see, you could easily see him putting up, it's like Keenan Allen. I saw that comparison and it stuck for some reason. So you could see a Keenan Allen kind of line here, like an 8 for 80 kind of line from him, maybe a touchdown. And we'll see. It'll be a good matchup to watch, to see how he does against that weakened Chicago defense. We already have a weak Kansas City defense, and then we have Michael Gallup in place of Amari Cooper. In place of getting a bigger opportunity and maybe running more downfield routes. Where do we have on Gallup? And let's compare Gallup to Bateman.
I mean, I would put Gallup ahead just because the
Mm,
instant connection that he had with Dak when he came off of injured reserve looked fine coming back. Didn't hear about any reported setbacks, and now this is going to be in a matchup that they're definitely going to need him without a doubt. And what's the competition for targets? I mean, it's him, CeeDee Lamb, and then are we really relying on Cedric
right.
Wilson, Noah Brown? I mean, Dalton Schultz sounds like a very nice one-off, but other than that, yeah, I think Gallup, I think we put him ahead of Bateman just because the quality of the quarterback play. I mean, even with Lamar Jackson being there, I mean, sick or whatever, but playing with Dak in that game environment against Kansas City, I would put Gallup ahead of Bateman at this point.
Yeah, what I'm interested in is how much changes in Dallas's approach to ideally having, say, like 30 or 35 running back carries and maybe 25 pass attempts. And does Patrick Mahomes, when you have the Patrick Mahomes versus the Dallas defense side of that matchup, does that throw gasoline on the fire? Because even though they were putting up points on the Raiders, it wasn't like it was an air show. Or is it kind of a conservative game where both teams are trying to put together 7 and 8 minute drives, and it might be a little bit disappointing from the passing standpoint? That being said, Gallup's really good. If he didn't play with Cooper and Lamb, he could be somebody that takes up a lot more, like a souped up Jarvis Landry, basically.
Yeah. The offseason is going to be really fascinating with Gallup because I don't know, if there's a way Dallas can keep him, great, and really see that team, that passing game, really take off next season. But I would love to see him as more of a functional wide receiver too somewhere else, because I think he's a fantastic player.
Yeah, we have the off season. It's we're in the middle of the season. You don't think too far ahead, but when you see that Tim Patrick contract, that means maybe Cortland Sutton could be out there.
I was just about to say that,
right? So it could be a really interesting off season market. Let's get back to Week 11 and let's just run through, just sprint through some start sits as we talked some of the thornier players through. And a lot of these questions are going to involve these players. I'm just picking a spot in the middle. Let's go. Dane asks, PPR flex, James Conner, Mark Ingram, or Michael Gallup. Isn't that convenient?
Oh, yeah. It's Gallup. I mean, that's, looking at all of those guys from, opportunity, offenses they're attached to. Yeah, Gallup for me.
And I think that the proposition there, you've hit on this a couple of times, is sure, volume is king for running backs, but volume that is mediocre quality, which, Trevor Siemian's your quarterback, when Colt McCoy's your quarterback, maybe that's mediocre opportunity versus Gallup, who has, I think, a more of a big high efficiency opportunity because of how he's playing with his quarterback, as you mentioned. And maybe we will get a shootout. Let's have a quarterback question from Awesome Austin 0607. Justin Herbert, who's going to play the Steelers, sans TJ Watt. No TJ Watt in this one. No Joe Hayden in this one. Or Ryan Tannehill, who's playing the Texans.
Now, for this one, I would probably actually lean Ryan Tannehill, to be quite honest, just because, looking at that matchup against the Texans today, I know there's supposed to be there is some rain in the forecast, for the game with the Titans. But other than that, with Tannehill playing a little bit better, even though he's without Julio Jones, Herbert, I don't know what their game plan was this past week with the Chargers. Very conservative game planning for Herbert. So I would lean more towards Tannehill just because we know that he can rush while they're inside the goal line or within the 5-yard line. So that's always in play for a guy like Tannehill. So I lean in that general direction just after what we saw from Justin Herbert last week.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Titans are probably going to account for 4 offensive touchdowns, 3 or 4. How many are going to be Tannehill's hand, whether as a runner or a passer? You just want, by the middle of the third quarter, you hope Tannehill got his. With Herbert, like you said, Joe Lombardi might be holding him back, but the neurotic Steelers fan in me says, go Herbert, because what's the Steelers defense without TJ Watt, right?
That's true.
We're going to find out tonight. A good question here, tangential to some of these running backs we talked about. Matthew Manns, enough concern with Tim Boyle starting for the Lions at Cleveland that we should sit DeAndre Swift for the likes of Jeff Wilson or Dante Foreman?
No, just because the team was just so, so willing and so ready to just go ahead and give Swift career highs in terms of running back carries or just his touches. What do you have? 37, 38 touches? 30, 33 carries and 4 or 5 targets. So if the team is so willing to do that, where else are you going to be able to find on your roster that similar level of workload? I mean, efficiency is something that's more volatile from a week to week or game to game basis. So if I'm looking at a player on my roster that is going to see north of 30 touches in a game, I'm probably going to start that player that's going to get those types of that type of workload, and then just wind up hoping that where those touches come, maybe he winds up breaking a long one. Maybe he winds up catching a pass that winds up, going, like, taking it to the house. I mean, those are always things that can happen in a game. So I would lean more on the workload than trying to think past, oh yeah, it's Tim Boyle or whatever the game environment might be.
Yeah, Cleveland, they were pretty good against the run until last week. New England gouged them. But really, I think a way I could frame that question too is like, is Tim Boyle that different than the Jared Goff we've been getting the last few weeks anyway?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you know what you have with Swift here, and Jamal Williams is back. I don't know how big of a deal that is. I personally would still go Wilson over Swift. Look, I'm just eager to find a way to get Wilson in my lineup.
That's
any sort of crack in the door. Yes, I would put Wilson in there. Foreman over Swift is a little bit more aspirational. Not that it might not be right in hindsight.
True, but I guess the other thing to that though is if you have, like, let's say like TJ Hawkinson on your team, he would be a guy that I might swap out for, I don't know, insert tight end streamer here. Yeah, exactly. Like that would be one of the Detroit players that I probably want to switch out. Swift, I might keep in.
Yeah, just Hawkinson. Again, this is one of those things where Chris, I think, and maybe I'm just projecting my own psychology because I'm a prisoner of my own psychology, right? I think Hawkinson's a player that if we didn't have the expectations we had for him coming into the season, and he even started to fulfill them to begin the season, and he hasn't even really come close to it in the last 5 or 6 weeks. He even gave us a goose egg last week, and I'm still getting Hawkinson I got a Hawkinson or Arnold question.
Yeah, I'd probably go Arnold at this point.
Right, Dan Arnold. I mean, that's where we are. Like the sage Bob Harris says, divorce the name from the numbers. And maybe this is another one of those questions. Chris, Smooth Criminal. And I said Annie. That was a really weird audio thing, right? I started saying Annie, are you okay? Because it's Smooth Criminal. Russell Wilson, who's done this to us before in the second half of the year, or Tua, who maybe is finding himself the last time we saw him, and he gets to play the Jets.
I mean, I would look at possibly starting Tua in this matchup.
Yeah.
I mean, the Miami Dolphins, like when Tua has played, they've been more efficient. They play relatively up in pace. I mean, all of the signs point to Tua being a guy that you can trust in a matchup like this. And we're not leaning on the running game. Myles Gaskin, for all the opportunities he's gotten, what does he have, like 30 some odd carries and maybe like 80 yards in the past like few games? So if the running game is inefficient, and they've been really tried to kickstart their running game by the short passes to Jalen Waddle, Mike Gesicki, so on and so forth. I mean, I would like to see Devontae Parker back. I would like to see Will Fuller back. But even without them, they've been relatively productive. So yeah, it's completely defensible to start Tua over Russell Wilson after what we saw last week for both teams.
Yeah, definitely. And there's an adjacent question here, but just you mentioned Will Fuller. Will Fuller's not getting $10 million, and again, not until he can play a whole season. So an adjacent question to that from Smooth Criminal: Lockett or Jeff Wilson? I guess this is another test, and you kind of already answered it because you're willing to say, yeah, I don't know how much faith I have in Wilson. Does that translate to Lockett? And then can throw Metcalf in there for people that are thinking, really? Am I really thinking about benching these guys for the likes of Jeff Wilson?
Yeah, and I mean, it's worth considering at this point, just because even if the opportunity is going to be there, I mean, what is your level of expectation for either of those guys? I mean, at this point, I can already see, I mean, a number of people like starting Tyler Lockett just being disappointed because he can wind up with 3 for 66 or 3 for 26. I mean, it's entirely possible. So yeah, I'm leaning more towards the workload that we've got for Jeff Wilson in this game, and then the expectations that come with that, especially going up against Jacksonville, who's played better defense. But with the way that San Francisco just played last week, I mean, yeah, I'm leaning more towards Jeff Wilson at this point.
Yeah, and I think for me, where that question becomes more interesting is if we start incorporating more like the Dante Foreman, Mark Ingram part of the scale of our temporary value running backs, because Jeff Wilson I'm just really excited about. So it's easy for me to go, but also I'm struck by, if we were just looking to the last 4 or 5 weeks with some of these players, Chris, we wouldn't even pause, right? The reason it's a question, the reason we get these questions, the reason we ask ourselves these questions when we set our lineup every week is because of the expectations we had going into the season, and maybe expectations that were set by the early part of the year. But it's best to be in the here and now when you're setting your lineup. And more, Chris, I think the way that this season's going in fantasy football, and maybe in the NFL too, as it goes in the NFL, so it goes in fantasy, right? The team that gets hot will win the championship, not the team that was the best team all year.
Oh, yeah.
The team that has the players with the most momentum, and then there's momentum of players and situations, and then they align, poof. And that's why a player like Jeff Wilson, and this goes back to the conversation Dr. Gene was having with us about, hey, I'm skeptical. I'm looking at the actual injury and some of the things about imaging. I'm not listening to what the coaches are saying. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not looking at teams, whether teams were right or wrong. Like, that's the thing. A team cannot put a player on IR and just be wrong about their forecast of how long the injury is going to take to be, because that's the thing. Teams value these roster spots so much, Chris, that I really think that if teams felt reasonably certain that an injury was 3 weeks or more, they would put the player on IR. And so often this year we're seeing them not do it. And I can only assume this because they're too optimistic, or maybe they're listening to the player who says like, yeah, I might be able to play on it next week, because the player's always going to say that. Players won't play.
Yeah.
So it's just fascinating. And I think a player like Jeff Wilson could be a league winner. That's where I was going with all this. You know?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, player like Mark Ingram. Yeah.
Yes. Could possibly be a league winner just because they come in at it's not about the opportunity, but it's like the timing. It's like where you're at in the season, where your team is at, and where their respective teams are at in the season that can help push them into a better spot, like in terms of like playoff positioning and whatnot.
Right. And in the case of the 49ers and their commitment to the run, this is the time of the season when defenses can get tired, when you have the business decisions and so on. I mean, it all intersects, right? Everything in fantasy football is something from football analysis. All right. Let's hit on a couple more positions. We talked about Cole Kmet, Mohamed Youssef. What's up, Mohamed? Dalton Schultz gets a little boost maybe from Amari Cooper being out, maybe not. And Cole Kmet, and we haven't really talked about the Bears offense yet. What do they do coming out of the bye against the Ravens?
Oh, that's true. I lean more towards Dalton Schultz. I mean, this is only because of Amari Cooper being out. Like, all things being equal, I would have leaned more towards Kmet. But if we're looking at what that projected game environment is going to be, like with the Cowboys and Chiefs, I mean, I know you painted the scenario of Dallas trying to lean on their run game, maybe sprinkle in some more targets to Tony Pollard, like that sort of thing. But even if we wind up having a more conservative type of game plan, I mean, some of those passes, I mean, if we're already projecting Gallup, Lamb out on the perimeter, what Cedric Wilson, Noah Brown in the slot, I would lean more. I would think Dak would probably look more towards Schultz, who has been the more productive pass catcher in that interior part of the field than either of those two wide receivers. I mean, Cedric Wilson had that long bomb a few weeks ago, but no, I think for this week in this matchup, I lean more towards Schultz. But Kmet has shown to be a reliable pass catcher over the past few weeks. What has he been averaging? 4 or 5 targets a week so far over the past month or so with Fields coming on? So it's close, but I think just with the quality of passers that they're attached to, I lean more towards Schultz.
Yeah, I'd give Schultz the edge here, and both of them have good matchups. And we just have a better sample earlier this year of Dak to Schultz producing fantasy goodness, but we're coming maybe towards that with Chicago. I'll touch on a couple more players that I myself have like knots in my brain when I think about what to do with Antonio Gibson, for instance. Sorry, what's up, man? Always love seeing him in the chat room. He's a essential member of the community, man. Our football guys community. What's up, man? Rashad Bateman, who we talked about, or Antonio Gibson, half PPR, maybe gives the running back a little more consideration. But what do we think about Antonio Gibson? Because Chris, going into the bye, well, you weren't thinking about him. You probably weren't thinking about playing him. You were thinking about holding him and hoping something good happens. Well, something good happened, kinda. I mean, they weren't that efficient running the ball against Tampa, but they stuck with the run, and Gibson eventually got through the cracks, ran hard, scored twice. They beat Tampa. So we have this 1 week sample of this offense and this player being productive against a trend saying he's not going to be productive. Where are you at on him with Bateman, at least for this one, but more overall? Give us a picture too for Zara.
No, I lean more towards Gibson in this matchup just because, 2-3 weeks ago, we were looking at, is this going to be now a split with Gibson and McKissick, and then also Jarrett Patterson also getting worked in, and like he completely put that type of concern to rest. Didn't see much of Patterson. I mean, McKissick, even in a game where we thought it was going to be more of Washington playing from behind, they got Gibson allowing them to play from ahead. We saw all of the third, fourth down conversions that Gibson was a part of, and like that entire workload really kind of leaning more towards him, like being their star or being their, I guess, their workhorse back. So yeah, from an opportunity standpoint, I lean more towards Gibson, even though Bateman is likely going to be the quote unquote next man up with Marquis Brown out today. I still think that with the amount of touches that we can project for Gibson, he should be the guy.
One more, I don't have the question to pull up, but just overall level of worry, if any at all. Someone mentioned Aaron Rodgers banged up. He's got that toe issue.
Mm-hmm.
They said he took 15 snaps in practice on Friday. He's coming off of the COOF list, etc.
Yeah.
At Minnesota, does it change your view of the Green Bay offense or of Rodgers when you're weighing? I think it was Rodgers or Cousins in that game facing each other. What do you think about Rodgers with that toe issue?
I think it's going to be problematic. Like, I think if you're thinking about like the possibility of him being able to hit like Devontae Adams, who he hasn't really had like that same connection with this year as he did last year, or even like some of those deep shots to like Marquez Valdes-Scantling with Allen Lazard out. I'm not as optimistic about the Packers passing game as I was like kind of coming into this week, because they're actually saying this is going to be a toe injury that's going to linger for the rest of the season for Rodgers. This isn't just like a 1 to 2 week type of thing. So I would say that there is some concern there. I mean, for folks that are rostering AJ Dillon, great. I mean, this is definitely going to be the week to see him do his thing. But no, I think it's fair to wonder what we're going to how we're going to look at this Packers passing game with what Minnesota's their front seven. I mean, it's not that bad. Their pass rush has been fairly decent. So hopefully, Bakhtiari is not back this week. So I think there's actually, I'd be somewhat concerned about like the Packers like offense this week.
Yes. Well, just in general, these are the things that we look back on. And when the Packers, it goes both ways, because one is the Packers pass offense, Devontae Adams could underperform, Aaron Rodgers could underperform. You could look back and saying, I should have been benching Aaron Rodgers every week for quarterback like Tua or whoever, just quarterbacks that Mac Jones, whatever. I mean, just quarterbacks that may have more to offer depending on the matchup and how the team is going because of that momentum, versus does it open the door for AJ Dillon? And this is another one. Let's tie in Dr. Gene's theme one more time. AJ Dillon league winner. Everyone's projecting, you're going to get a week or two out of AJ Dillon. I got a lot of questions of people trading AJ Dillon this week.
Oh, wow.
Trading away AJ Dillon. And it may be enticing and tempting. And I think I even advise a few people to go for it. But it may be week 15, week 16, Chris, and we're still saying, is Aaron Jones going to be ready to play? Or Aaron Jones is going to play this week, but he's not going to get his full workload because it's his first week back.
Right.
While AJ Dillon's coming off of a streak of 3 straight 100-yard games.
Yeah, we can.
And that's the new Packers offense, and that's the Packers blueprint going forward.
Right.
Partially because they're trying to protect Aaron Rodgers and that toe. So we try to put these pieces together, folks. We try to see these things coming. By the way, speaking of seeing things that are coming, I want to say hi to my great friend Uriah Zane Hunt, who sent me this awesome Doc Ellis shirt. And it gives me the opportunity to tell everybody to go find a documentary, and learn about the great Doc Ellis. If you get anything out of this show, that's what you should get, folks. We get a lot out of spending time with you every single week. It's wonderful to have you in our lives and be in your lives, as football brings us all together, all of our lives together every week. And we enjoy the ride with you the most because you're so classy.